Hello everyone and welcome to the ups and downs for Star Trek the Motion Picture. I'm actually really excited to start this series of retro ups and downs for a number of reasons. One is that I have so much cosplay that I'm just dying to wear. The other is that, it's the Star Trek films. What's not to love? We knew that we were going to start after Section 31 came out because what better time to kind of get cracking on the Star Trek film series with the release of a Star Trek film. Obviously, the ups and downs for Section 31 are available on the channel, so check that out at your leisure. We are going to be going through each of the films in sequence. Maybe there'll be a surprise in there, who knows? I don't want to say. Grab your full orchestra, get ready to dive back into the 1970s, and would you take a journey with me to the Enterprise 1701? The first up in Star Trek the Motion Picture comes before the film even starts. The overture that plays before even the Paramount logo it's like a beautiful ask of the audience. Let's enjoy this together. Let's fly through this starfield and let's enjoy this gorgeous piece of music that is aptly called Ilea's theme. Keeping in mind, this came at a time in particularly sci-fi cinema when Star Wars had just exploded onto our screens. As you know the Star Wars theme. I think it's safe for me to assume that. That was a way of kicking you straight in the side of the head and going, right, we're doing sci-fi fantasy, we're gonna go explosions, the whole lot. They knew when putting together Star Trek the Motion Picture that they didn't want to just repeat Star Wars. So this was, I think, a sort of a tip of the hat to be like, yep, we know that started with music. We're starting with music. We're doing it gently because this is a different kind of film. Which is not to say, of course, that there isn't some action in this film. So after the Paramount logo and the motion picture theme tune, which, by the way, I'm going to come back to, I'm going to talk about Jerry Goldsmith. Don't worry, but if I upped every single musical cue that he put into this film, the up counter would be at like 1 million. So just don't worry, I'm not forgetting Jerry as I go through this, okay? Lovely, lovely, love that opening theme, plays over the credits, brilliant. It's the Klingon battle that gets the next up in these ups and downs. I don't think I've made any secret of the fact that my favorite Klingon ship of them all has always been both, sort of even Stevens, the Katinga, which is introduced, of course, in the motion picture, and the D7 battle cruiser for the Klingons. I've loved it. It is my favorite design easily. We get 3 of them, and not only that, but take another up for that absolutely flipping glorious pan in, up and over the bridge of the Katinga, and we see it flying off that way as well. I love it. I love it. What I don't love is the look of the Klingons in this. Now that might seem a little bit controversial because of course this was the jumping off point from which the Klingons that we came to know in The Next Generation up until Discovery. I've no issue with the redesign themselves. It's the fact that they've got that facial. It makes them all look like those colonial hunters, like the ones you see in Tarzan. Yeah, I just don't really love the look, if I'm honest with you. I think they refined it and it looks an awful lot better in The Next Generation. What is hard not to love, however, is the inclusion of Mark Leonard in this scene. Now he's under all that makeup, so you'd be forgiven for not knowing that you're looking at Sarek, who is captaining this Klingon ship, but it's him. So that makes him the first Romulan seen by the Federation. It makes him the first of these new Klingons seen on screen. And of course he played a mildly important Vulcan as well. So do you know what? I probably should leave this to temporal observations, but I'm still just gonna go. I've got to give it an up for Mark Leonard here. There are bits of this scene which become so important in Star Trek's lore overall. That is something I will discuss in temporal observations. But for here, the 3 Klingon battlecruisers, or one of them, they go up against this big cloud in the sky, and they don't fare too well, do they? We get the first appearance of the Epsilon 9 station as well as we cut to that. Now, this is a Starfleet station. It is absolutely gorgeous. It does, of course, look like a big cracker in space, which I do not hate. And they are watching. There's a lot of watching people doing things. They watch the Klingons engage with the big cloud that will get a name in a while. They see that the Klingons don't fare too well. We will return to Epsilon 9 for a happy ending. Let's cut, shall we, to the next up, which is Vulcan. I should make it clear at this point that I am reviewing the remastered director's edition of the motion picture, and I probably should have opened with that, but the reason I'm doing that specifically is not just because, you know, I'm not just a snob for a remaster. I would totally understand if you did think that, but no, it's because this, with all of the work done and all of the love put into it, is how the film was supposed to be seen. Now, in 1979, and well, 77 and 78 in the production of this film, there was rather a few blockades to stop a version of the film more closely resembling this, making it to theaters. This is how it was always meant to be seen. So if you're in a position to, I say, please, by all means, pick up the disc if you can. It is available on Paramount Plus as well. You know, if you're able to get your hands on this, you will not regret it. This film is gorgeous. We obviously did a previous ups and downs that compared the theatrical to the director's edition, particularly the remastered director's edition. In case anyone was going, haven't you done the ups and downs for motion pictures already? No. The scale, the scope, everything, it makes you feel like, yes, Vulcan is just this arid landscape. You understand when you then learn later on that, you know, Vulcans are able to operate in lower oxygen levels. They have, you know, a second set of eyelids that we learned. That's how Spock didn't go mad from seeing a Medusan without the visor. When you see Vulcan like this, you can kind of understand that. When you think of perhaps Amok Time, when Vulcan was, and hey, listen, it was a TV show in the 60s, they did great work. It was effectively a red backdrop. You know, at least the remaster of the original series goes a bit toward helping that scope. Returning Leonard Nimoy, lovely to see him, is there trying to achieve the Kolinar, which is the ceremony to celebrate his achievement of pure logic. But before he can be presented with the Kolinar medallion, he pauses because he hears a call from across the cosmos. Spock is told that he will not seek what he finds on Vulcan, and it's quite abrupt. It's not particularly friendly, but it is exactly how I would expect purely logical Vulcans to act. This then booms again into Jerry Goldsmith's theme for the motion picture as we are transported to San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and Starfleet headquarters. Up, because I've always loved this scene in either version of the film. You know, the earlier theatrical edition, this nice cleaned up version, gorgeous. Love the air tram, love everything about it. And I will also give a special shout out to the 70s threads. I love it. It's so 70s. Like this film really feels of its time. And that can be a negative. As you know, sometimes things are so dated in the moment, you're like, oh, okay. And there is no arguing that Star Trek the Motion Picture is a 70s film, which makes it, like, you know, with the exception, of course, of the animated series, which is an extension of the original series, it makes it really the only 70s Star Trek. I am going to catch hell for saying that because, again, as I said, animated series, but was always an extension of the original series. So it's quite unique in that respect. I really dig it. Someone who doesn't seem very happy is Admiral Kirk. William Shatner bursts onto our screens with that gorgeous Admiral's uniform, which I really like, I'm not going to lie to you. And we meet our new Vulcan science officer, Sonak, who gets a very large part in this film and in the ongoing franchise. This dialogue sets up the threat that is the, as we currently understand it, big cloud that destroys Klingons, and that it's on a direct course to Earth, which we heard from Epsilon 9, and the Enterprise is, naturally, it was the 70s, the only ship in space, whatevs. Kirk is going to be aboard the Enterprise, that's his plan. He can't beam there, so he beams to the orbital office. Up. We've seen this appear again and again in Star Trek, but this was its first appearance. And I have to say, I've always dug this design particularly with those copper tubes that are coming out the top of it in the motion picture. Again, a funny thing for temporal observations. But then Kirk beams up aboard this office. Who do we meet? Well, it's only a mustachioed Scotty. He doesn't have a beard, so we can't really use the beard watch graphic here. I do apologize. Before I do have to put a quick down in for this scene, because this is something that it's been in every version of the film, including the remaster. So I have to give a down for that projection of Kirk and Scotty in the window of the travel pod. Unfortunately, the dimensions, the way it actually looks, it's always just that moment. I know it's coming now, but it takes me out of the film. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, it's never quite looked good. And I presume at this point, it's as good as it's ever going to look. I say I have to get that out of the way because if you're new to this channel, fair enough. You won't know this about me. If you have spent any time on this channel whatsoever, you know that my favorite sequence from Star Trek, and I mean from the cage right up until section 31, is the reveal of the new Enterprise in dry dock. It's my dilithium up. It's so good because at the time, this was the longest special effects sequence ever. There's many things about Star Trek the Motion Picture that today are surprising because enough time has gone by that, a lot of the behind the scenes detail have been released. We're aware of things now that, you would never have been aware of when you were going to view a film for the first time. So I can only imagine what it was like to sit in that cinema and just be blown away by this gorgeous, and I do hear the critique of people saying, slow. I hear that, I do. This was a game changer. This was new. I suppose, although it's much shorter, a comparative is maybe the camera running underneath that Star Destroyer in that opening section of Star Wars. The difference here being it's about a 7 or 8 minute sequence. This, I think, is emblematic. We must, of course, speak of Star Trek the Motionless Picture. This is emblematic of, I think, a lot of the issues at the time were, what's this film doing? Where's it going? Why am I checking my watch? I'm not ignorant. I know these things. And I'm very aware that I am reviewing this film, having seen it dozens of times and in a 2025 lens. So I know going into this film that it's slow. I know there are pacing issues. And I know that we're not going to get a big, I mentioned action. There's a bit more, but it's not that film. And I know all that going in. I can appreciate going into the theaters in 1979 and going, that was 2 hours, that was. Almost every film that followed the motion picture, in fact, do you know what I will say? Every film that followed the motion picture in the Star Trek franchise dialed up the action. I do think there are some films that really balance the action very well, and there are some that don't. None would ever be as static as the motion picture again. I can't lie to you. I have bias. I love this film. But okay, I'm going to be fair. I'm going to give it down to Star Trek the Motionless Picture. I think it would be disingenuous of me not to. You have to address the pacing of this film. It feels weird to give it with the new Enterprise. But listen, it is what it is. And fair is fair. So as we're flying over this ship and this gorgeous scene put together by Doug Trumbull and his team, which itself is a whole section of just the behind the scenes kerfluffery that went into making this film, I feel it was an absolute triumph. And it's completely self-indulgent. Again, that is something that comes up in this film an awful lot. Is it self-indulgent? Yes, it is. Do I enjoy the fact it's self-indulgent? Yes, I do. I do have one more up before we leave the sequence altogether. Kirk and Scotty. I have down how it looks in the shuttle, but there's an exchange in there that I really like. Kirk says, Nagora gave her back to us. They gave her back to me, Scotty. I doubt it was that easy with Nagora. You're right. That feels very comfortable. That feels like this is two old mates. And at this stage, it's well documented that William Shatner and the cast of Star Trek were not exactly the best of buddies. But there's a familiarity, and that was an up for me. Kirk boards the Enterprise, and you can see a little bit of, I guess, bravado? This isn't his Enterprise. It is, but it isn't. It's been gutted out from stem to stern, and he doesn't know his way around anymore, as evidenced by, he is offered help by this, this ensign that's like, oh, if you'll follow me, I can find my way around. Sure, I get you want to save face. Are you being rude, or are you being, professional? But it's a very, very new look of Enterprise, and he does make it to the bridge. That floating platform has freaked me out every single time that I've seen it in this film. I'm just like, oh my god. All it takes is a slight lean in either side, and he's gone face first into that captain's chair. Up for Uhura, up for Chekhov, up for Sulu. And you're like, but Seán, you didn't give Spock an up. Do you not think they're coming? Great to see. I think we're nearly here now at this stage, obviously, an exception, but we nearly have the whole team back together again. And again, I can only imagine what that was like in 1979. For me, watching it in 2025, I get this sense of warmth when I see them. It's not to say that they're used fantastically in this film. I'll copy and paste that statement for several more films in the Star Trek film series, but it is nice to see them. And particularly Nichelle Nichols, who I think of the three of them gets the most to do in this film. Director Robert Wise, who was no slouch when it came to, he's made some big films. He made The Andromeda Strain, he made The Day the Earth Stood Still, and that's just two out of a pretty impressive, CV. You ever heard of West Side Story? Nah, me neither. So he directs this film, and there's so much going on, as I say, behind the scenes, but I do want to get something, I guess, out of the way, if you like. It's a down. There's some interesting focus choices made with the camera work. For example, when Kirk is talking to Sulu, the choice is made to keep the pair of them and the captain's chair in sharp focus, which makes perfect sense in theme with what they're talking about. But the way the rest of that shot is blurred, and again, as I say, if I'm looking at it in the remastered version, we know this was a deliberate choice that's been kept up to today, and it really looks odd, I have to say. And another one of the things, but not to overuse a phrase, but takes me out of the film. It's a very strange composition of a shot. I have to say, I don't love that. And I do like an awful lot of what Robert Wise does with this film. I guess on that, an up is we're going to go down to engineering now, and the entire engineering set is just beautiful. If you've watched any Star Trek since then, you can see what a blueprint it became for engineering in Star Trek, because it's quite different from the original series. And that came at a cost because, so the story goes, Robert Wise arrived after production on the Phase 2 series had begun, after which models and sets had been built, and effectively said, doesn't work for me, let's do new ones. So, the finance people were tearing their hair out, but it's hard to complain when we get a set like engineering. Kirk has gone down for the specific reason of effectively introducing himself in this film, they've met previously, to Captain Willard Decker. It is impossible for me to discuss the character of Decker without discussing the actor Stephen Collins. And I just want to say that this might be quite triggering for some people watching, so I will totally understand if you want to jump forward a couple of minutes, because this is quite a serious topic, obviously. So I think there might be a timestamp under me right now. If there isn't, just jump forward maybe 3 or 4 minutes to move past this. I will be attributing ups to the character of Decker in this film because he plays such an important role in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Actor Stephen Collins was investigated in 2014 for allegations including inappropriate touching and molestation of underage girls years previously. He subsequently admitted his guilt. In a way, I would just as soon not discuss him in this film, but he is, or should I say Decker, is such a large role in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Decker and Ilia become the template for Will Riker and Deanna Troi. They are very much ingrained in the plot of this film. When I'm assigning ups to Decker, I want it to be very clear that that is for the character. And that is for the writing and the direction involved in the scenes in which the character appears. I will probably leave it at that. If this is something you were not aware of previous to this, all of the information is online. I will not be discussing Stephen Collins any further in this video. Kirk informs Decker that he is taking command of the Enterprise, and there is a back and forth between them that does highlight the fact that Kirk you know, sure, he's James T. Kirk, but he's also been sat behind a desk for 2.5 years, and he is not familiar with this version of the Enterprise. This is something that will become a theme throughout the rest of the film. This is distracted somewhat by the fact that, remember those transporters weren't working? You probably shouldn't be using them then. So there is a sort of an electrical shorting out in engineering, and though Kirk and Scotty try to stop the transporter signal from connecting, it does. So it's a really odd time for me to say, up! It's lovely to see Grace Lee Whitney back as Janice Rand. I just wish it was in a different scene. The transporter accident is a shocking, horrific scene in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Like, it's one of those things where you catch yourself laughing, but more out of surprise than it's not funny at all. Both characters suffer a horrific fate, one of whom is Commander Sonak, who was to be the new Spock, if you like, because, you know, Spock on Vulcan doing the Kolinar. He was the Vulcan science officer. Well, not anymore, because there's that chilling line. Oh, the transporter is engaged, and Rand says, oh no, they're forming. And you hear that echoing scream, then they vanish. Kirk speaks to Starfleet headquarters and says, do you have them? And just that response of, what we got back didn't live long, thankfully. Oh, Jesus, Star Trek. There's a moment then with Kirk where, again, you see this, it's not lack of experience, but he's definitely a bit rusty. I mean, on not even his first day, his first hour back in service, he's lost 2 crewmen. He takes a moment to say, it wasn't your fault, Rand, there was nothing you could do. And then when he leaves, he seems genuinely lost. And not just obviously in terms of his bearings, but is he in over his head? We get then the scene on the recreation deck, which I love. This is a up for me. You know, you get so many cameos of people who were very involved in Star Trek behind the scenes. You see aliens who are introduced in this scene, they are brought back in this scene. And also what I really like about it is it shows you the scale of the Enterprise. When working in a 1960s budget and sets, you don't really get the opportunity, outside of engineering, which was pretty impressive, to do the true scale of the Enterprise. Here, you've got a room that's almost 3 stories tall, and you've got a cast of extras that fill it. It finally looks like you've got a bustling, busy, large spaceship. It's quite funny when I say large, and then I think of like the Enterprise F or the Enterprise J, where this like fits into a room. But anyway, still, I really like this recreation set. We contact Epsilon 9 station, and I feel bad saying up to the destruction of Epsilon 9. Like, you're like, oh, Seán, okay, so you're a monster. Sweet. But yes, we get the destruction of Epsilon 9. It gets absorbed into the big cloud. We see David Gattro, who was gonna be Zon, but then he wasn't. Temporal observations. Again, we get another scene of Kirk looking very, oh my God, you know, in front of the entire crew. He's at a loss for words. That's an up. What's it down is the jaunty musical tune that follows immediately from this scene. Did anyone else find that cue just a little bit oddly placed? We now meet Ilea. Persis Kambata, who is obviously an up, arrives as the new navigator, Lieutenant Ilea. We immediately see that there is a backstory between Ilea and Decker. Again, think Will, Riker and Troy. As presented, my oath of celibacy is on record, is a down. There's a lot of talking about, oh, she's a Deltan, she's a Deltan, she's a Deltan. There's nothing in the script that actually gives context to that. Quite frankly, and, you know, duck for cover, but Section 31 gave more context to what a Deltan can do. Obviously, Star Trek Picard Season 2 did a little bit as well. But here, as brilliant as Persis is in the role, we just know that everyone likes them, and she's celibate. And we felt the need to include this in a multi-million-dollar film. You know what I mean? More on Ilea coming. Taken up, Disco McCoy. Oh my God, DeForest Kelley coming back for this film, sporting the, can we do it now? Can we do Beard Watch now? Beard Watch. Sporting the most epic beard. He's obviously been working on that for a while. I mean, look at mine. Look at mine. He's been working on that one for a while with the turned up mustache and everything. But anyway, Oh, just how great is this scene? Just a damn minute, Admiral. They drafted me. He plays it perfectly. He's exactly what you want McCoy to be, beaming back up. He's grumbling. He also delivers some pretty important exposition. We learn that Nurse Christine Chapel is Dr. Christine Chapel now. Well done. And this finally leads us to getting out of Earth. We get that wonderful leaving dry dock section, and then the one I really want to highlight is that flying past Jupiter has always looked gorgeous to me, which leads into our gorgeous warp effect and then our not gorgeous wormhole sequence. It's way too long. In a film with pacing issues, I would use this as the example. Obviously because bias because of the new Enterprise. It's set up to obviously highlight Kirk's inexperience, highlight the new issues and strengths of the Enterprise. It's a holdover from some of the visual effects nightmare that this film went through in its production. There's logical issues, but really, I every time I watch it, I catch myself checking the time. I do like that rainbow effect as people slow down. That's something that's obviously been used again and again in Star Trek since, Lower Decks did it, Discovery did it. But here, and slowing down the dialogue like you're turning to the tempo, it's a slog. It does set up that Decker knows the Enterprise more than Kirk does, but another down, why wouldn't Chekhov be aware of the fact that he couldn't fire phasers? The scene is written in such a way that Decker is going to countermand Kirk, they'll have their scene in the quarters, but to do that, you have to dumb Chekhov down, because as the weapons officer, would he not be the most qualified to know that he wouldn't be able to fire phasers? He would just fire torpedoes instead. So this whole sequence, to me, too long, and there's a bit of logical fallacy. Kirk's not very happy that he got countermanded, so he drags Decker to his quarters once everything's sorted and says, "Why was my orders countermanded?" Decker's honesty with them works. I like it. He doesn't just stand there. It's still respectful. It's still, Admiral / Captain while he's serving as the captain of a starship and commander. That doesn't stop, but Kirk needs to hear some of this. And McCoy calls him out as well. Going from slow pacing to feeling like we're kind of hitting fast forward, the Vulcan shuttle Serac arrives, taken up. I've loved that design forever. And of course, we get Spock back on the Enterprise, taken up, taken down. Did Chekhov beam to the bridge? Because how did he go from being behind Spock at the porthole? Spock arrives alone on the turbo lift and Chekhov is standing on the bridge. Now, we are glad that Spock does make it back because he knows how to fix the engines, because Enterprise has been communicating with Starfleet on an open channel and everyone can just have a listen in. I suppose when you're the only ship in the quadrant, that's not as much of an issue back then. We get that scene where McCoy, Kirk and Spock have a bit of a catch-up and we're like, "Oh, Spock, crack a smile, will you?" Sets up everything we need to know. Spock's kind of here for himself, but it will benefit the ship as well. McCoy quite fairly says, "How do we know we can trust him?" And Kirk quite fairly says, "I don't think he'd ever put us at risk." I do have another down. It's another blurring issue. Even just standing in front of that starfield, their heads are kind of out of focus the whole time as well. It was a bit awkward. Spock's help does get them to intercept V'ger when it's still more than... Oh, did I say V'ger? Anyway, still more than a day away from Earth. Just my last down for a second is, what's the point of having Decker there if all you're going to do is disagree with every single thing he says? He thinks taking the ship into the cloud is an unwarranted risk. Frankly, yes, there is that conversation of it's his job to offer other opinions, sure, but it's very, at this point in the film, it's a bit like, would you come on, naively thinking that we've only got half an hour left. So we go into the 9th hour, no, I'm not kidding. What I do love, and I cannot get over the gorgeous beauty of, it's the cloud. Flying through that cloud, I've always loved it. I get it if it's as dull as dishwater, but for me, I just kind of lie back and go, oh, this was meant to be experienced on a big screen. This has definite shades of 2001: A Space Odyssey and the Stargate sequence. A little bit less LDS heavy, but still gorgeous. It brings us to the scale and the scope of what's inside the cloud. And again, take an up. This might not be the most exciting film, but this is a feast for the eyes. And scenes like this really highlight that. We then get the probe on the bridge. And for me, visually, this is the worst scene in the film. It has never looked great. And I want to be kind, 1979, but they're reacting to very bright light, fine, I've no issue with that. They're not really reacting though. I will say, right, down for the probe scene. I will give an up to Chekhov. You know, they're like, don't interfere with it. Absolutely, I will not interfere. Okay, in fairness, Walter Koenig, you nailed that line. What are we reacting to? What's over there? Even the remaster couldn't save this scene, I have to be honest. And we also have a continuity error. You know, Spock goes and smashes the console. 1 second later, it's completely repaired and we don't deal with it again for the rest of the film. Take it down. And then, of course, we lose Ilea. What? And while I will put Ilea aside for a second, because it's not the last we see of Persis, of course, it's all a bit, well, that happened. I will give Decker's response a minute pass because we don't know at this stage what's happened to Ilea. From their point of view, she might have just been beamed off. She hasn't been. The Enterprise has got a tractor beam and it's pulled closer and closer into this massive vessel at the heart of the cloud. And there's a fun line where Kirk goes, now we've got them right where they want us. I really like that line. And I like the delivery as well. That's an up from me. Then you get the introduction of the Ilea probe. So it's the iconic, you know, the sonic shower reveal. You get the, I guess it's a dressing gown, like a bathing robe. Why she's wearing heels, God only knows. You know, it's 1979, that's your answer. This is a funny one because it seems like they're taking it seriously. I guess in a way I want to get it down out of the way because I think this is valid. They're all a bit like, oh yeah, it's bad, isn't it? Yeah, tough luck. Just that carbon unit's no longer functioning. Yeah, okay, yeah. Let's talk to this probe. Sorry, Ilea's dead. Right, okay, that was a bit offhand, wasn't it? But what I do want to give an up to is the interactions with this probe. They quickly establish the fact that this probe is a reconstitution of what Ilea was, including her memories. And I think they walk a fine line of, let's try and engage it on an emotional level. But at no point is it played like, oh, well, you know, because it's impersonating a female, we can, you know, females are more emotional or anything. If anything, Decker is the most emotional person in this film. The only thing being, even he, it gets better, but even he's a bit like, yeah, that's bad, isn't it? I'm annoyed that Ilea's gone. Yeah, well, tell your face that. While this is happening, Spock decides he's kind of done having a chat with a probe. So he's going to nip out on a spacewalk. And I want to give an up to that extra with the porn mustache who went absolutely all the way to make sure I've remembered him every single time I've seen this film. I've never seen someone react to a Vulcan neck pinch with quite the, I'm having my moment. And you know what? You earned it. That's an up from me. Spock's nipping out on a spacewalk and he's got to go through that aperture and I really like that sequence. While that's happening, you've got Persis Khambatta as the probe is, I think, one of the underappreciated gems of this film. Like, she's so good. From simple facial expressions to her inflection of tone to the way that she moves. I think what a thankless, difficult job it must be you have to be completely emotionless. You are a robot. But like, you don't even get like data levels of interactions. And she nails it. It is absolutely an up from me. Spock is floating through the holograms and the reproductions of everything that the, I can call it V'ger now. Okay, great, cool. Yeah, Ilea Probe calls it V'ger. Whew, V'ger. So all of these reproductions, and this leads him to attempt a Vulcan mind meld with the equivalent for the sensor node on the Ilea Probe. I had to think like, kind of are you able to do a mind meld if you're wearing gloves? But then the sheer overwhelming power of V'ger's mind, be it sentient or not, yeah, okay, I think that's going to get through some gloves, so I'm fine with that. What I don't like is what is the point of Kirk doing a spacewalk? Just beam him back. That was clearly we'd built 2 suits, we're using them. A critical scene in this film then occurs, and it's Spock in sickbay. You think Spock, do you think of Spock laughing? And these smiles and simple feelings? You kind of don't in a way, but also here it is. For every criticism about Ethan Peck's Spock showing emotion, about Zachary Quinto's Spock showing emotion, here it was, the blueprint, and I'm not talking about that laugh at the end of Amok Time, which is both great and played for comedy. This is serious. This is treated so... It is absolute up from me, because Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner sell it as well as they do, which is why years later, in 2024, in fact, when Otoy produced their unification short film, they attempted to evoke memories of this simple feeling with the two of them holding hands on Spock's deathbed, because it worked. Spock explains that he has learned that V'ger, as coldly logical as it is, cannot comprehend human emotion. And that's a problem. McCoy is the one to then, when they're on the bridge again, suggest that if this version of V'ger is, if you like, a child in terms of understanding, perhaps they treat it like a child. So Kirk decides, we won't comply. Let's get everyone off the bridge. Ignore them. No, we won't bow to your wishes. This is after V'ger has arrived in Earth's orbit and deployed some very dangerous weapons at equidistant points across the Earth. Equidistant. V'ger then says, well, hang on. I'll comply if you comply, because they're looking for the creator. But again, just up Persis Combata, Kirk unit. Kirk unit. Just that little change. Oh, chills every time. Every time. This leads to our scene on the Giant's Causeway. V'ger spacewalk, basically. Right, that's enough for me, because it's gorgeous. And I say Giant's Causeway. If you're familiar with the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, you can see what I mean. It's these hexagonal, or these shapes slot into each other to make this walkway to get to Voyager 6. The great philosophical ending of this film is... it's fascinating, it's beautiful, it's mildly frustrating, but all in positive ways. It is revealed that V'ger is in fact an Earth probe that was launched in, we find out, 1999. It fell through a black hole and arrived at the other side of the galaxy, where it then melded with these machine creatures who created V'ger to send it back home again. It has to deliver its mission. Its mission is to transport information back to Earth. It cannot comprehend that the carbon units infesting Enterprise and Earth are those that created V'ger. V'ger needs to join with its creator. This is where the film, I think, it hangs on a dime here. If this doesn't work, the film doesn't work. If you don't feel for this scene, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that this film is, it's just, look, it's not for you. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't blame you. I have to be honest, I think that the philosophical question posed by, is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? I think it's handled well. This is long before there was ever questions of, what is God in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and, what is God, technically, in terms of the emissary and the emissary of the prophets. Long before any of that. The God thing, in thy image, all of that came together, and I think it's very, very well. So, for me, the creator joining with V'ger, the idea of it is an up, as, in fact, is Decker's evolution. I think it's pretty clear that Decker was never going to be in the sequel. As the film goes along, I don't think the character is written in such a way. It's too combative. It's too, I don't think he and Kirk would ever really work well together. And of course, it was always Decker and Ilea. And as Decker keys in that final sequence and he joins with what's left of Ilea, with V'ger, with the probe, it works. And it's very sci-fi. It's very all good things. It's not about the bangs and the whistles. It's about expanding the human consciousness and beyond. And it's an up from me. This film, if somebody was to say, what is Star Trek? I would say Star Trek the Motion Picture. There is more. But if you're looking for the purest version of Star Trek, exploring the cosmos and exploring the possibilities of humanity and beyond, I would say stick on the motion picture. And before we go anywhere, before we take that trip to Temple Observations, Jerry Goldsmith. A large reason of why this film works as well as I think it does is Jerry Goldsmith's music. It is, obviously, it's an up. But from the opening overture to those opening credits, to that now infamous theme, which we would then go on to hear in The Next Generation and beyond, to the, the reuse of some of Alexander Courage's opening theme for the original series. Fun fact, the opening fanfare, dun, 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 not in this film. The New Enterprise, which itself is a story as how that came together. An instrument was crafted for this film. Craig Huxley helped develop the blaster beam that was used so often in this film. I don't think this will be a shock to anyone that my latinum up of the film is Jerry Goldsmith and his music. Now, would you join me, please, at Temporal Observations? Star Trek the Motion Picture is in many ways the blueprint for what Star Trek is, both, from The Wrath of Khan onwards, but right up until today. While it, of course, was inspired so much by, the original series and the work that had been laid for Star Trek Phase 2, it would solidify, I think, what the look of Star Trek would become for a long time to follow. You can see that the bridge, which of course is inspired by the original series bridge, would go on to inspire rather a lot of what was to come. The look of the Enterprise itself, the Aztecing, for example, that was added to this version of the Enterprise, which had been missing from Matt Jeffrey's original design for the original series Enterprise. I mean, they're still using Aztecing today, even now that we've moved to pretty much exclusively CGI models. Think of the leaving dry dock sequence. How many times has that been replicated in Star Trek in the years that had followed? And in fact, if you think as recently as Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, the Titan A is very much inspired, thanks to Bill Krause's Shangri-La class, the Neo-Constitution, of course inspired by this version of the Enterprise. And, the leaving dry dock sequence, very, 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 you can see that echoed in Leaving Space Dock. Of course, it borrows from other films as well, which we'll come to in due time. The motion picture brings Jerry Goldsmith into the Star Trek family. I would argue that with the exception of Alexander Courage's fanfare, Jerry Goldsmith has become, if you like, the most instantly recognizable sound of Star Trek. I mean, the motion picture march that would go on to become the theme from The Next Generation. Think of, again, to bring back Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, how composers Stephen Barton and Freddie Wiedemann were inspired by the work Jerry Goldsmith did for First Contact, which drew on themes from the motion picture. So you can see, hourly, how the motion picture still plays into what we hear today in Star Trek. The big questions of the film: is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? When Star Trek is perhaps at its purest, it's asking questions like these. Think of Next Generation's All Good Things. The crisis is not that the ship is going to explode, and it's not even, if you like, the fact that Picard is hopping through time. The notion is opening yourself, or the question, if you like, is opening yourself up to more than the 3 dimensions one sees around you. It's what Q says. It's opening up the possibility of the human mind and the capacity and the potential. If you like, the entire end of this film, The Human Adventure is Just Beginning, is very much that in another form. There are, of course, other things which are slightly more direct. The Kolinar would be revisited many more times in Star Trek. Redesigning Klingons. It's the only time it's ever happened, and it never happened again in Star Trek. And the redesign that occurred in the motion picture happened so that later redesigns could happen as well. Also, this redesign allowed, in a roundabout way, for the gag in Deep Space Nine's Trials and Tribulations that you had Worf, who was a product of the motion picture redesign, standing in a room with original series Klingons. It allowed for that joke. The motion picture had to happen for that to happen. In this scene, we get the first utterance of Klingon language, which was a combination of people went into making that. Obviously, Mark Okrand would go on to write the Klingon dictionary, but you had James Doohan, you had Jimmy Povell, you had a few people went into actually making these sounds. Mark Leonard obviously then speaks them. I could do an entire video where I just play with a model of a Katinga class battlecruiser and I would be happy. Chris will be like, Seán, this not going to get any views. But you know what? I would make that sacrifice. The Katinga class ship, of course, appearing again and again through Star Trek. The one thing I will say, which is I've never disappointed to see a Katinga class battlecruiser. Confused, Enterprise looking at you, it did end up effectively replacing the D7, which I also look for all of its monotonous, I think maybe description, probably the wrong word, but for all of that, it did replace it a little bit, and I like both. And the one I'm thinking of specifically is that episode of Voyager, Prophecy, where a D7 decloaks and starts attacking the Voyager. I mean, come on, that's a Katinga. That's a Katinga. The whole point of the D7 is it's as smooth as anything. Anyway, listen, not the end of the world. The warp effect, I know I downed the scene overall, but that effect when they go through the wormhole was evoked as recently as Discovery, the end of the second season. You know, I do like playing with that rainbow colour of lights. I enjoy that. Shock, Seán enjoys the rainbow, I know. Control your surprise. But also, I do like that visual cue, which we have seen since. We saw it in Lower Decks as well. The Epsilon 9 model, although it's only in the film for a kind of a short amount of time, it would reappear in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which of course I will talk about while we do that. You hear someone calling for Commodore Probert in Epsilon 9. Andy Probert was of course involved in some of the redesign. He did an awful lot for this film, helped redesign the Enterprise itself. Commander Branch of Epsilon 9 was played by David Gattro, as I said. Now, he was originally going to play a character called Zon on Star Trek Phase 2. When that series ended up not happening, they threw him a bone and said, hey, be in the film. I mean, they could have let him live, but sure, listen, here we are. The Vulcan practice of Kolinar would be returned to many times in Star Trek, as of course would Vulcan itself. This would serve as the real template for what we would understand Vulcan iconography and language, similar situation again from the Klingon language, to be from this point on. This idea of V'ger calling to Spock across the cosmos, well, we'd sort of seen that before in the Immunity Syndrome when he realizes that, you know, a ship full of Vulcans are suddenly snuffed out. And this sort of, I guess, telepathy that Vulcans are equipped with, but particularly Spock and his human side. Spock's duality is a theme that has been explored almost as many times as Spock himself has appeared in Star Trek. Most recently, again, in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Starfleet headquarters, that template exists right up until today. Picard and Strange New Worlds and Discovery all shared that template of San Francisco. Also, looks like right until the 32nd century, San Francisco is going to remain the headquarters there. The Orbital Office, as I mentioned, that will turn up again in the next film as Regula 1, but then it would turn up again in shows like Deep Space Nine, for example. It might lose the copper pieces at the bottom of it, but we would see the top half at Starbase 375. We would see it in the episode A Matter of Perspective of the Next Generation as well. Some reused footage going on, but still looks nice. Shout out for the director's edition. They fixed something in this scene. Back in the day, what there was not at the station was the shuttle pod that Kirk and Scotty fly over in. That was fixed and added back in for the director's edition. Billy Van Zandt plays a Randarite. This is the big-lobed, yellow-eyed alien on the bridge. They would turn up, they would be discussed, if you like, as Star Trek would go on. There was an image of one in the Strange New Worlds episode, Ad Astra per Aspera. The character of Decker is the son of Commodore Matt Decker. That's something that's confirmed in the novelization of this film. In fact, a lot of the information that is not on screen is confirmed in that film. For example, the identity of the second person in the transporter accident. Vice Admiral Laurie Siana was assigned there by Admiral Nagora to effectively keep Kirk in check. And, well, thanks Nagora, appreciate that. We find out through the Gene Roddenberry penned novelization, I should add, that she was an ex-lover of Kirk's, because bloody everyone was. At one point in the novel, I think the Enterprise is. The rec room scene is fun because, like I said, it's full of little cameos as well. Like, for example, you can see Bjo Trimble up there because, of course, she and John Trimble were instrumental in saving Star Trek from cancellation between its second and third seasons. We know that Michael and Denise Okuda are in this scene as well. In fact, many of the people who were massive Trekkies were in this scene. Many of them didn't cash their checks just to be in it. But not only that, we get introduced to, for example, Saurians first appear in Star Trek in this scene. We have 2 Indigenous American people as well, which is after, for example, the animated series episode, How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. It was a nice reminder that, yes, Indigenous Americans still very much exist in the, although it's not confirmed in this film, in the 23rd century. We also see a Betelgeusian, first instance of them, and they would of course return in Star Trek Discovery in the form of Lieutenant Yor, who would then return again in Otoy's unification video. Chris and Montgomery Doohan, the twin sons of Jimmy Doohan, are in this scene as well. We also see here 2 Vulcans. We see some aliens that would pop up throughout the rest of the series. We see Dr. Christine Chapel for the first time in the film in this scene. Also crucial as well is the portraits of the ships named Enterprise that are there. There was discussion when the 2001 director's cut of this film was coming out. Would one of those ships be replaced by the Doug Drexler NX-01 design? And they decided against it. In terms of how things fit into the timeline, I guess it doesn't make sense not to have it there. Of course, this film was made in 1979. They had no idea what an NX-01 was going to be. I do like the fact that the ring ship, although it had been designed by Matt Jeffries for the original series, obviously they ended up not using it. Nice to see it here. And the sailing ship, and of course the space shuttle, and the aircraft, and the warship as well, sorry. For a bit of context, when Dr. McCoy beams on, there is a scene where Kirk and Rand are together in the transport room, and Grace Lee Whitney has this big smile on her face. If you get a chance, I seriously recommend reading her autobiography, The Longest Trek, My Tour of the Galaxy, where she says it was DeForest Kelley who effectively saved her from unemployment, by which I mean he spotted her in an unemployment line, asked, where are you? Come back to Star Trek. And she's like, well, Star Trek's off the air. This was in the early 70s, or the mid 70s, excuse me. And he's like, yeah, but the conventions, people are asking for you. And with that completely chance encounter, that led to her appearance in this film, The Search for Spock, The Voyage Home, and The Undiscovered Country. I've never found anyone with a bad word to say about DeForest Kelley. So that big, massive smile on Grace Lee Whitney's face was mirrored, I think, by so many people in the audience. Although I love the costumes, I get why they weren't universally loved. And of course, when we discuss The Wrath of Khan, we're going to get on to my favourite uniforms. There is so much in this film that bears discussion, and I could make a 9-hour video on this straight away, but I hope I've been good. I hope the runtime is close to what I said it was going to be. Thank you so much for watching along. There is, as I say, check out our video series on the motion picture, and if you want to get even more specific, check out our ups and downs where we compare the director's edition to the original edition. Thank you so much for watching Retro Ups and Downs with us. These are so much fun. I love the Star Trek films. I hope you enjoy them too. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and send a bit of love to Chris, because if I know him, he's probably done an all-nighter and I owe him so many drinks. Thanks so much, everyone. I will see you for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Thanks a million.